Welcome to MRE Uncut, where we'll give you real and practical insights into the real estate scene in Melbourne. We'll discuss what's happening in the industry, all backed by MRE's history of over 30 years in the game. With that said, let's jump into this week's episode of MRE Uncut.
Welcome back to another MRE podcast, MRE Uncut. Today we have one of our portfolio managers, Louisa Raffaele, joining us.
Hi, how you going?
I'm good. My name's Steve Fitzsimon, and today our case is, I've started off with case. Today our discussion is going to be about VCAT.
Good old VCAT.
It's the water cooler conversation for property managers, I think you could say.
Mm-hmm. Definitely.
And I take it from your tone of voice that you haven't been overly pleased with the amendments that took place to the Act some 3 years ago now.
Oh, definitely not. There's so many changes now, and with all those changes, unfortunately, a lot of people haven't caught up, either owners, agents, renters, and so the expectations now are very different to what is happening in VCAT, and outcomes have changed.
So this comes a little bit back onto some of our earlier podcasts that we've done where we've talked about the changes to this legislation impacting various areas of the business, but there being zero publicity from the government other than the odd post on Consumer Affairs Facebook page telling renters and landlords about the actual impacts and changes of the legislation. Give us a little bit of an understanding from your side, Louisa, into what VCAT is and its primary functions in your day-to-day.
So VCAT nowadays, you'll make applications. They're either renters or owners or agents on behalf of the owners to come to an agreement. If the renter isn't happy with something and not wanting to pay something or not abiding by the Act, we would make applications on behalf of the owner. And vice versa, if owners aren't doing maintenance or following the expectations of the Act, the renters also have their right to apply to VCAT to be able to get an outcome if there's obviously been no agreements between the two.
So effectively you've got the first stage being that the owner makes an application to VCAT after they've made a notice or to the words of those effect. So first they do a notice to the tenant about something, and then if that doesn't happen, if they don't vacate, for example, if they're issued a notice to vacate and they choose not to vacate, then the owner makes an application to VCAT for a hearing, and then the tenant and the owner or the agent for the owner go to VCAT, have a discussion, and then an order is made that is binding for the parties to abide by.
Correct. Now, prior to this legislation, if you served a notice to vacate and a renter hadn't abided by it, hadn't vacated the property, you would go to VCAT, make your application, the member would see that everything was done correctly, and you would receive your possession order. Now that has changed under the new legislations. There is a section of the Act that's come in talking about reasonable and proportionate.
So what's that mean, reasonable and proportionate to what?
So this is what the VCAT members now use and will determine if it is reasonable and proportionate for a renter to be vacating the property. Whose hardship is going to outweigh more? Is it the renter's hardship or is it the owner's hardship? This here nowadays is playing a huge effect on all of the outcomes between rental arrears, between owners selling a property with vacant possession. Unless that property is sold, finalised, a member may not award vacant possession unless it's actually completely deemed in the contract. Because if they see these sort of things now and they believe, hold on a minute, a renter has looked after a property throughout their whole tenancy, why can't the property be sold with a renter in there? And then after it's actually been finalised, allow them to, the new owner, to then serve them a notice to vacate, to move into the property. Why put somebody else out of their property? These are the sort of things that VCAT are looking at nowadays.
So let's go back a step. So formerly, if you were selling your property and you wanted to doll it up, maybe give it a coat of paint inside, change the carpets, these type of things, you would issue the tenant with a 60-day notice to vacate because you have the intention to sell. Now, if you do that same notice to vacate, the member must refer to this reasonable and proportionate. And in the circumstances that we've got now, where we've got a renting crisis, a housing crisis, what you're telling me is that they're going to sit down and go, okay, there's Mr. and Mrs. Smith who live in the property with their elderly mother or their 3 kids, and they've been looking after the property for 5 years, paying the rent on time, being good tenants effectively. But for one reason or another, the owner feels that they're going to get a better outcome with the sale if they give it a coat of paint and tidy it up and do all that type of things. Now they're going to have to make that application and expect that the member is going to compare their circumstances. So if they're a well-off investor, then they're going to be sitting there and going, well, it's not that important to you that these tenants are out. Sell it with the tenants in. We're not going to give you an order that they vacate the property.
That's correct. So nowadays, it's a lot of the times it is very hard for an owner to prove that they're more inclined as in hardship towards them than what the renters are.
They're removing choice from the owner and making keeping an investment property worse because you don't have the freedom that you used to have in the midst of a rental crisis.
That's correct. Owners are feeling like they have absolutely no more control in terms of when it comes to VCAT or their opinions or what they choose to do with the properties.
So the question here is, okay, I'm a landlord. I'm looking to sell my house, do anything with my house. What's the first stepping stone? Should they be contacting their property manager before they even plan their next 12 months with their property if they've got some ideas?
Most definitely. So this is a thought that you should think about at your time of your lease renewal. So your property manager should be contacting you 3-4 months before that lease renewal has expired, and have a think about what you want to do. You obviously have time. You're going to get your new disclosure statements, update those. Once you have made your decision, pass that on to your property manager. They can seek out advice from your sales teams and so forth to be able to get you your good appraisals and to be able to take steps from there.
So basically, you can't assume like you used to assume.
Definitely not.
Everything's
not
changed.
Yes.
You need to have an expert on the ground and give me a little bit more history to your engagement with VCAT. You've been in some pretty amazing cases that have sort of accelerated and gone beyond the realm of normal VCAT experience for many agents in Victoria. And for that reason, you're seen at MRE as our sort of guiding light for MRE operations in VCAT. Give us an insight into the cases and the challenges that you've seen since this, or since in your experience through VCAT.
So I've unfortunately seen some pretty nasty things within VCAT. I've had to, at a previous agency, dealt with renters who took advantage of the loopholes within VCAT. They were pretty much known to VCAT as a vexatious litigator. They would cause a 20-minute hearing to be heard over an entire day, plus an extra 3 hearings with reconstitution hearings, and then taking things further to Supreme Court, to then going back to VCAT these were little things of the words that were used, your actions that they were using. They would take advantage of every little system.
So if we go back, like in my understanding or the way it was worded when I started in real estate was that VCAT, or the Residential Tenancies Tribunal, showing my age here, but the VCAT was supposed to be designed to be two people that aren't experts in the law coming together and having a discussion that was mediated by a member who knew the law and could apply the law fairly. And you're saying that now people are using litigious ways of getting their outcome, or at least delaying any outcome, and therefore causing additional harm to the owner of the property. Does it happen both ways? Do we get owners that are litigious in the same way, or have you experienced that, or is this something that is primarily being pushed out? Look, I'm concerned. I'm sitting there trying to play both sides here, and I know that we've got problem tenants, but I'm also I sort of look at the incidences that you read about of problem owners and as well, and how they go about it at VCAT.
I have seen a fair few problem owners as well. And I find that it's because they have not been educated. And that's simply what it is. It's the owners have extremely high expectations of how their property should be left at, for example, a vacate. We see it all the time when it comes to cleaning.
Yeah.
VCAT standards of cleaning are very low. Now, in the Act, it is reasonably clean. That is how a property needs to be looked after.
So if the owners had a high cleanliness standard, because I think we can always relate this to our friends, as brutal as this can be. You go around to one friend's place and the place is spotless because they're one of those clean freaks. Then you go to another mate and it's not quite spotless. It's clean enough for them. They're happy with it. So they're both thinking that the place is reasonably clean, but they're different. And so when you go to VCAT, it's not about your personal view about what is reasonably clean. It's the members' personal view. And what you were telling me before about an interesting way that they described that reasonably clean should be in one of your cases. We'll go through that.
A VCAT member has previously told me that they expect reasonably clean to be just a quick Saturday morning clean. So for owners and for renters moving into a property, that quick Saturday morning clean is not good enough. If we had to give a property over to a renter to move in as that way, they will not be happy about it. To hand a property back to the owner, they would not be happy about it. But a VCAT member would determine it as reasonably clean. So who is to blame in this situation? Who does the cost fall upon?
Yeah, it's complicated. They added that section that if it had been professionally cleaned before a tenant moves in, that you can request that it's been professionally cleaned at the end of a tenancy, which I think is a smart move. But the bigger challenge I see is the people who put a lot of time and effort into cleaning their property up because they want a tenant to come in, or they've bought it and then they give it a coat of paint and they clean it so it's spotless, and then they come out 12 months later and the tenant has given it a quick once over on a Saturday morning type clean, and then they're obviously disappointed when the ruling goes against them at VCAT. So you've got the reasonably clean circumstance. If you're looking at it from end of tenancy matters, what are the most common things that are sort of coming up?
Both cleaning and damages to floorboards.
Okay.
That is a big one nowadays, especially in fully furnished properties. I would always recommend, if you've got a fully furnished property, make sure that every bit of furniture has pads on them at the bottom. These simple things will actually help you towards the end.
Yeah, it's funny. You put pads on your own furniture if you've got timber floors or timber flooring, but you may not have put it on your furnished rental property.
Exactly. So you see a lot of that then. As soon as a member looks at fully furnished and there's all scratches in your dining area, the member is not going to award much because they're going to claim
That's fair enough, though.
that's
Really,
with your
you look at
furniture.
it, it's your furniture.
Yeah.
They've used it as it's designed to be. You may not have thought about putting the padding on it, and therefore it's caused damage. It'd be hard to expect the tenant to pay for that. But yes, the damage has been caused, and it's a frustration. But so it's being preventative in that
Yeah.
manner. How are they looking now in terms of, like, the biggest ones that I think back in my days were like hooks in the wall and then gouges in the walls. How's VCAT viewing those now?
VCAT nowadays, when it comes to hooks in the walls, they're letting them through because they're saying that renters are allowed to turn it into a home. They've made reasonable changes. They hasn't impacted the pricing. It hasn't impacted future rentals. It has made no impact at all. They've simply turned it into a home.
But doesn't the legislation say that they must return it to the state that it was in previously
Yes.
after making the modifications?
Completely right. It does state that. But in doing so, they need to paint a whole entire wall.
Yeah.
And a member won't award to have a full wall painted because of depreciation. So what do you ask then? A renter just to paint up that little small spot of where that hook was?
But that'll be visible.
Then it would be visible. Exactly.
So if you, let's say you walked into our office and you said, okay, I want to rent my property out. I've got picture hooks on the walls. You'd just say, just leave them there.
I would be saying leave them there.
And what if you didn't have picture hooks on the walls? Would you be recommending that they put them in?
As in an owner would put them in?
Like if they're living there at the moment and they're thinking about preparing their property for tenants, do you put them in or do you leave them
Possibly put them, the 3M hooks, the ones that don't damage the walls.
Right.
Have them already prepared there so that the expectation to renters is, hey, I'm going to let you can put these in, make this your home.
So they're not banging a nail in.
Exactly.
You're sort of making it functional that you can put the 3M hooks in.
Yeah.
Interesting. Okay. So we've got damages not really being awarded the way that they're written up in the Act. You mentioned something about depreciation. That's something that they've introduced now in the new Act, that everything has to be depreciated according to the ATO guidelines. So if we look at paint, if you've painted a property 3 years ago and it's had a tenant in it that's been great, and now you've got a new tenant that's been moved into the property, you haven't needed to repaint it because it's in really good nick, and they live there for a couple of years, but they've pretty much trashed it. Like there's scraps and marks and so on. And even a normal VCAT member would go, yeah, look, they've damaged it. What are you going to get back from a member under those circumstances?
You might be lucky to get 30%.
30%.
So lucky. It depends on what area it is. If that is a high traffic area, your kitchen areas, your hallways, you're going to get very little. Members look at even just hallways. How wide are they?
Right. How likely is it, therefore, you're going to bang the shopping as you walk down it or whatever it
Exactly
is?
right.
Yeah. And I understand a bit of that. The one that I think is challenging is we had a case, it was a few years ago, and we had an incident where it was a family home, and the parents had lived there, an elderly couple, and they had beautiful wool carpets that went through the property, and they were lighter coloured, but they'd been in there for about 15 years, but they were immaculate. You know what I mean? These were an elderly couple looking after the property, and they had, they looked brand new. And the tenants then moved in, got themselves a dog, trashed the carpets. Not all tenants do this. Some are perfect, and we recognise that. But in the example, unfortunately, they sort of trashed these carpets. And then the owners were looking, because it was the owners with the children, so that was their parents' home. And they were like, well, what are the, surely they have to replace the carpets. Do you know what I mean?
They would have been awarded nothing.
Yeah. That was the outcome. So it's fascinating that even in these circumstances where you would think that perfectly good carpets, that if they were looked after and were fine, then they would be they'd be perfectly ready to be used by the next tenants and so forth. But the problem is that VCAT doesn't assess it as we would assess it.
Very much so. Unfortunately, that's how it is nowadays.
Yeah. Well, they couldn't claim depreciation on their carpets because they were living there, but they did depreciate. So it's super frustrating for owners, and you can see how they get that, the misconception. So if we cover off on it, how do we avoid these? Is it just through communication with your property manager if you're a tenant or an owner?
Communication. Make sure everything is always documented, always in writing. Back up every conversation, always in writing. Photos, videos, whatever you can. Receipts. When was the last time the property was painted? Just make sure everything is always documented. Note these things at your lease renewals, or at the time of your leasing. You're coming up to 15 years of your carpets. Say, hey, I know that they're looking still pretty good. Just to let you know, this is what may be the case if anything further was to happen to carpets in VCAT. Give that owner the decision. Do they want to replace it now with nothing really wrong with them, or risk having nothing paid?
Louisa, it looks as though we've just got to continue with the education.
Education.
Yeah.
That's all. Like, I cannot drill that enough to owners and renters nowadays.
Perfect. So if you've got questions about this type of thing, we encourage that you communicate with your agent. And if you're not getting the answers, then reach out to us. We'd love to have a chat to you. Louisa, thanks for coming in today.
Thank you for having me.
Hopefully that's given you some sort of insight into VCAT. We look forward to you joining us next time.